everyone. Today we're joined by Prathiti Kumar. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
great. How are you today?
I've been doing well. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And let's see, hopefully I'm able to, tell you my experiences and my journey so far. So let's see.
That's
Hopefully it's not
great.
all over the place.
No, that's great. Thank you. So to start off, can you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, kind of your career history, your advocacy, etc.?
Um, so I started off my career on a very, I would say, not what I'm doing currently, which I'm working as a fundraising assistant in a charity, homeless charity. I started off in a philanthropic startup. So it was basically an art therapy startup. And there I started off as an intern, then I was promoted to workshop and events manager. So what I primarily did there was we did art therapy with cancer kids, basically we were working with Make-A-Wish. So we used to do weekly art therapy sessions with the kids. We were also involved with local public schools. So this was one of the most, I think, something that pushed me into the charity sector and that I'm
Hmm.
really proud of is one module that we created with a local public school in Jaipur known as Jagriti. So there, as we all know it in India, sexual health, especially for children, it's such a taboo subject, as
Hmm.
there is no such thing as, sex education at
Hmm.
primary level or even at high school level.
Yeah.
So through the medium of art, without pushing too many buttons,
Hmm.
in because I was working in Jaipur, Rajasthan, and
Hmm.
it still has a lot of systemic issues,
Hmm.
especially around gender and sexual issues.
Yeah.
So, in a very non-direct way, we were teaching kids to identify on their body's good touch and bad touch, and
Hmm.
who to report it to, how to go it further, how to, talk to somebody, and
Hmm.
how they shouldn't feel afraid and actually talk to their parents about it. So it was just a body, it was actually a very fun workshop. So it was just, we were tracing their outlines and we would ask them, so, like with flowers and thorns, we would explain them. So these are the parts that are thorns, and these are the things that people don't necessarily, a friendly person wouldn't come in contact with. So,
Hmm.
just modules like these. And I saw it make such a huge impact.
Hmm.
So that's, I think, how I got into it. And my personal experience as well, I think, guided me into it. And now
Hmm.
I'm working, it has been a few years in between where I worked with Save the Children Fund for their draft education policy.
Hmm.
It was then a draft education policy, national education policy. It's now been implemented and enacted.
Yeah.
So they basically wanted feedback from all the local public schools and teachers. So
Hmm.
Save the Children Fund wanted to create a database for all the feedbacks from the government schools they were working with. So
Yeah.
I was the feedback link. So I used
Hmm.
to go to all these public schools, teachers, ask them about the ideas that they were going to be introducing in the new education policies, what they thought the barriers would be, what their feedback was. So, and I compiled it all into a report and we send it in. So yeah, basically a 3 year of experience of working with different organizations and now ending up in a fundraising role. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And I think your work is very important, from a young age. I think it's very important to let children know what's right and what's wrong. And especially in places where sexual health and healthy relationships is a very taboo subject. You don't really teach that to kids. So you mentioned you got into it kind of because of your own experiences. How do you think being a woman has changed your perspective on life, work, relationships, everything?
Um, so basically, I've had a very interesting personal journey myself. So I think my family kind of struggled with alcoholic issues from a really young age because my father, all my life suffered with alcoholic addiction. Um,
Mhm.
so my mother for most of my life was working outside, and then from the age of 16 I became a young caregiver for my father because
Mhm.
he was ill in and out of hospitals and my mom was working. So I had to shift universities closer to my father's place of hospital and residence, and I had to live nearby.
Mhm.
And so I think just from my personal experiences, I, of course, it's a sad part of my life that I now talk about freely because I think it's so important to talk about it.
Mhm.
Because now that I talk about it freely, I realize there were so many other people going through the same things.
Yeah.
But at that time, I didn't have the resource structure or somebody to point me in the right direction to tell me where to go out and not lose myself in the process. So
Yeah.
I think this is what really drives me to be a
Mhm.
part of those resource structures so that people like me understand that there are other ways to get out of it and there are alternatives. Because sometimes when you're stuck in a tough situation, you just need those alternatives to fit your reality, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's so interesting. I think it's really important to discuss the bad and the good because I think there's so much that shapes us as humans, like not even as women. I think as humans, there's so much that shapes us. And I think it's so important not to neglect the bad as well as the good, which is so
Yeah.
important. Um, so kind of on top of that, I'm assuming, personal experiences kind of sparked your interest in kind of feminism and advocating for women and children rights. Is there anything else that may have influenced and sparked that?
Yeah, so I mean, just adding on to that, I think my entire life I've seen in specifically, even though I acknowledge my privilege of coming from a middle class family and still
Mhm.
having the financial resources to find alternatives, I still realize the stigma that I say that is,
Yeah.
it's a belief system that needs to change. And it takes
Mhm.
years to do that, but that
Yes.
is so fundamental
Mhm.
because even for myself, I have heard, Hindi phrases like, oh, a woman shouldn't be, heard, she should only be
Mm.
seen. Or like having, for my mother, I've seen her own struggles, she couldn't divorce my father even though she was struggling so much because she knows she couldn't have that support structure. She wouldn't have the trust of her relatives or family or the structure that she needed to
Mhm.
get out of a bad situation.
Yeah.
So I think still, even though feminism in a broader term in first world perspective has taken a more modern sort of a narrative, in India
Mhm.
we're still struggling with just human rights,
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
basic right to just have decency at maybe workplace or just a
Yeah.
security to travel to your workplace,
Mm.
we're still struggling with the minor issues. And even though there are policy changes, even though people are talking about it, their advocacy, there's campaigning, there is still the belief system that kind of goes against it or acts against it. So it's
Mhm.
just a vicious cycle, at the end.
Yeah.
So I think to really break that, it's about changing the belief system. And I understand it could take generations together, and that's a
Yeah.
whole other story. But
Mhm.
yeah.
So I completely agree. I have, Asian heritage and I know exactly the culture that there is. And I think there's a very close link. People tend to link religion and culture together. And so when you try to change that or you try to bring it up and you say, there's a deep-rooted issue within the culture that is kind of against women, it's very patriarchal based. Do you ever hear maybe criticism back that you're intruding in our culture? You can't change the culture. Have you ever kind of heard that kind of feedback?
Yes, I have. And I would say that's more from, again, it's my personal experience, but it's more from my generation, not from my mother, because my mother
Mhm.
has been a very progressive woman. Even though she couldn't break the cycle, she's very progressive in her thoughts and ideology.
Yeah.
And she made me aware of every religion growing up. So
Mhm.
that made me kind of aware that at the end of the day, it's not the culture's problem, it's the radical ideologies that people try
Mhm.
to perpetuate in the name of religion.
Yeah.
So I think I try to find a common ground, at least with my parents or people who are more conservative in their ideologies, that it's not
Mhm.
the culture that I'm trying to attack. It's more the radical ideology that stems from it or people that try to impose it.
Yeah, yeah, I completely understand. That's very true. And when you're kind of, I mean, it must be so much harder trying to, as a woman, speak about female rights in environments that are not used to hearing these conversations. And I think all around globally, feminism has such a bad reputation. When people hear feminists, they think, oh, this radical ideology that kill all men kind of situation. And
Mm.
what are some common misconceptions about feminism that you've come across while you're advocating or that you've just heard?
So I think maybe after coming to the UK,
Mhm.
because again, I'm very aware of my own positionality in all of this, and I think everybody in debates need to be very aware about their privileges and positionality.
Yeah. Yeah.
So whenever I hear debates about women have the same kind of, access to jobs, they even have quotas to help them access jobs, then it's just a matter of, oh, they don't choose a certain profession that is high
Mhm.
paid.
Yeah.
This is the most, I would say, even from people who are well educated on the topic, this is the most common misconception that I hear about. So
Mhm.
at least from my perspective, from an Indian woman, it's just not about quotas,
Yeah.
It's about not having the access to education from an early age. It's about
Mhm.
getting married off at an early age. It's about so many things, so many missed opportunities in your childhood. It's about
Yeah.
so much trauma that you carry with yourself that you need to resolve as an adult to first
Mhm.
join that workforce,
Yeah.
be with the people who might not have dealt with all the issues or the traumas that you have,
Mhm.
just existing kind of becomes a little hard. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, to be in a competitive field, even in India nowadays, I think my mother tells me incidences of where they ask, oh, are you married? So how many
Mhm.
do you have kids? Like, this is such a
Yeah.
common question because they
Yeah.
want to know how many hours can you put in. If you have
Mhm.
a child, then their automatic assumption is you're the primary caregiver, so you wouldn't be putting in as many hours. So,
Yeah.
it's not about changing the exterior, like, oh, we have very open, inclusive policies. It's
Mhm.
also about these subtleties, just
Yeah.
making the workplace more equitable, at least for people to access from, and also understanding their barriers, when
Mhm.
I say equitable. So, yeah, that's, I think, that is the one misconception I heavily see. And another one, I think this is kind of restricted to the Indian diaspora, and I only
Mhm.
realized it after I came to the UK and did my master's in development studies. I
Mhm.
realized you can call it a misconception or an ignorance,
Yeah.
perhaps. Even from my part, I would say this: feminism back home is sometimes trans exclusionary, and we
Mhm.
don't take their rights into account. So we also
Yeah.
have to think about feminism is just not about women who are biologically born women. It's
Yeah.
also an encompassing term. And when we talk
Mhm.
about, making an equal platform for everybody, regardless of the biological differences, we need to take into account other sects of women too.
Yeah, exactly. Completely agree. I think sometimes people tend to look over um other genders and when they kind of see feminism they think, oh, just biological women.
Yeah.
So how do you approach conversations with individuals who are resistant or skeptical about feminism?
I think it might loop back into my same ideology that I use with culture and the perpetuating of radical ideology. It's always like finding a common ground and making them realize it's not men against women. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually just an equitable society. And I think because people take it quite literally, it's called feminism. So
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
think, it's about female just taking their things against women, burning them down,
yeah.
but it's nothing like that. I think for me, it's just human rights, isn't it?
Mm,
Feminism is just asking for your human rights. So it's a very easy concept for me. We can debate on it. There are so many sides you can debate on, and there's so
yeah.
many perspectives within feminism that people debate on. But I think
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, all it kind of boils down to is just basic human rights. I hope I answered your question. I didn't
No,
go.
yeah, no, yeah, I think you're completely right. I think there's so many people I think you come across who are very skeptical about feminism because of, what's kind of out there online. And what you see online, whether that's pop culture, music, movies, and so forth. I think a lot of it's exaggerated heavily online. How would you say the online media, like how important do you think they are in trying to change the conversation and kind of the implications of the word feminism?
Um, so I think particularly in Indian media, I see a lot of portrayal, which I think is cute and kind of dangerous for feminism,
Mm-hmm.
because there is this image in Indian media, at least, that a woman who is quiet, not so resistant to the cultural norms, actually accepts it, um, does not break the things that have been going on, are perceived as good. They are
Mm-hmm.
always seen as the women who gets the man,
Yeah.
the good one. And it's
Mm-hmm.
always the girl who is a little bit more outspoken, would wear shorter clothes, a little bit more rebellious, maybe would go out and smoke and drink alcohol. Like it's such and then she would have very feminist views, because
Mm-hmm.
throughout, and very skewed feminist comments throughout the movies.
Yeah.
So I think, and then it's always she would get the guy, and then eventually the guy would go to the girl who has,
Mm-hmm.
follows all these. So this is the trend or the pattern that I've seen over the years, perpetuated so much,
Yeah.
even in Bollywood movies right now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I now see that same sentiment being kind of transferred to TikTok reels that you see from Indian masses, Instagram reels that you see from Indian masses. And I
Mm-hmm.
see so much hate under comments of women wearing short clothes
Yeah.
about just basic judgment about the kind of women they are. So I
Yeah.
think media really plays a big role in how people perceive and see other people, and
Mm-hmm.
make judgments about their qualities as a human being, even though it might not be what the person is like, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's so important for Indian media to change that narrative. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
high time, and
Yeah.
to more progressive movies, even contents. I think a lot of times, even in woke podcasts, I see
Yeah.
there's a lot of debate and a lot of controversial topics that come in, but there aren't, and they're so popular.
Yeah.
But on the other side, people who might be talking about it, they don't get as much views. So I think it's just the controversy it just gets more view, because that's the narrative I think it has set. So I think
Yeah.
there's a need to break that chain and just change the
Mm-hmm.
narrative a little bit. Get
Yeah.
it to more masses, like just eat and trickle it down, not just keep it to the masses who are more middle class and upper class, but I think
Mm-hmm.
trickling it down to the last sector
Mm-hmm.
through media is, I think, very necessary.
Yeah, I agree. I think you see people trying to make content more controversial, maybe anti-feminist remarks just to get views. And I think people don't realize how much of an effect that actually has on the public. I
Yeah.
completely agree. So, kind of stemming onto that, what do you think is the most kind of pressing issue or challenge that, women face today? And how do you think we can what steps do you think we can take to combat this?
Um,
It's a
I
heavy question.
very
Yeah.
heavy question, because there's just so many layers to it, and there's just
Yeah.
so many things to work on.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think f feminism at the end of the day should be again fighting for human rights. And I think in fighting for that human right, just advocacy and campaigning, I think, needs to be a little bit more rigorous
Mm-hmm.
and persistent. I know, and I can't say it hasn't made a difference. It has made a huge difference over the years. And I think it just needs to keep on and keep on going,
Mm-hmm.
because the belief system will only change when we share our ideas of alternatives, as I said before.
Yeah.
So, and again, providing people with that opportunity and quotas is a good thing, but
Mm-hmm.
really being inclusive at workplaces right now is not happening,
Yeah.
like truly happening in the sense
Mm-hmm.
of it all. Being maybe feminism from the point of disability, right? Being maybe feminist from the point of queer rights or trans rights or and just any perspective. There just needs
Mm-hmm.
to be a little bit more representation at the table, I would
Yeah.
like to say. As they say, everybody should get a seat at the table. And
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
just not higher up in policy making decisions. I think it
Mm-hmm.
needs to trickle down to even like household decisions. There
Yeah.
needs to be a seat at the table at every sphere. So,
Mm-hmm.
one, I think the freedom to share your feminist ideas should be a little bit more accessible, I think.
Yeah.
And also, I think it should be, for me at least in India, that I see the biggest challenge is the campaigning and the shifting in ideology is
Mm-hmm.
only restricted to the middle class or the upper class. I would
Mm-hmm.
really like to see it trickle down and see initiatives in India that can target all these sections that are being left out, perhaps because of their inaccessibility to media, perhaps their inaccessibility to resource centers, and other things that they might not be aware of. So there needs to be a little bit more infrastructure targeting all these populations, because if we talk about belief change, it has to be a pan out thing. It just can't be in pockets.
Yeah, yeah, that's entirely true. I completely agree. Um, so you've done so many wonderful things. I think you've really gone out there and done what you can to promote these views and kind of work towards improving women and children's rights. Can you share maybe a role model that you have or someone you look up to that's been an inspiration for you in your journey?
This might be a little cheesy, but I'm gonna say my mom.
Oh,
Yeah, I have to, because it's maybe a little bit more philosophical thing to say, but I see
Mhm.
her as my role model because I I she came from a background that wasn't, maybe she gave me so much more than what she had, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And she has so much better ideologies than even compared to her peers, I would say. So I
Hmm.
think just her giving me that space and understanding, because she had no other alternative. She had
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
other ways to understand. But like her willingness to go out there and create a
Mhm.
change for herself, that's what I found truly admirable, because at the end of the day, when everything works against you, it's only your willpower that can push you forward to achieve what you want to do. So
Yeah.
I think that idea, even for a woman who at one point I could see had no avenues open for her, still going on and still fighting against it, I think that was admirable. And I see that in so many women out there, not only just
Hmm.
famous figures, just regular women in my life. I see them struggling every day and they do it
Yeah.
flawless.
Yeah.
So just the strength and the willpower to fight against the system, I think.
Yeah, that is so cute. I think that's really admirable. It's something that really takes a lot of guts and confidence to do. And I think it's so easy to be disheartened by what's out there. And kind of it's really tough to go on and continue this when it's hard to make a change. So what kind of advice do you have for advocates out there who are trying to make a change, but are facing multiple obstacles or are seeing very little progression?
I think I would just say keep on going, because there are a lot of situations when I used to work on the ground and you're just met with a case where you're like, okay, there is just no change happening. Even though I'm
Hmm.
trying to push, I'm trying to work here, even though I'm trying to raise awareness, there's just not that thing. But I think there are some cases when you reach out to the person, A. B, there are cases that you might not be changing the generation that you're talking to right now, but her kid might be there and she might be listening in.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the idea of sharing it, and you never know who might gain from it. So it's just the
Hmm.
idea of just keep going. Don't think of the results, or just don't think of it in a quantitative term. Think about it in
Hmm.
a larger picture, and
Yeah.
think about like this belief system took so many years to cement itself. So it's also
Hmm.
going to take some years to break and start a new generation. But if we stop fighting, if we stop talking about it, then that's the end of it.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. So I just want to thank you so much for all the conversation we've had today. I think it's been really engaging and really informative. And again, I just want to congratulate you on all the work you've done so far. And honestly, I can't wait to see what you come up with next. But thank you so much for this.